The claim I will be refuting today is that the Oklahoma City Thunder will win the NBA championship within the next 5 years. The supporting points that my opponent used to support this claim was the roster strength, the free agency market, future draft selections, coaching staff, and the team's defense. To begin with the roster strength, only 2 players were explicitly mentioned in my opponent's claim. These 2 players were Russell Westbrook and Paul George, so I'll be focusing on them. My supporting claim is that the 2 best players on Oklahoma City Thunder are not that great compared to other NBA players. 2 players do not make up a basketball team. They may be good, but according to FoxSports.com, only Paul George is ranked top 10 in points per game, and Westbrook is 19th. On any given table that lists the top 10 per averages in the NBA, only one or the other player can be found in the top 10 except for steals per game. It was also stated that Paul George had 10 games in which he had 30-plus points. That's nothing in comparison to James Harden, who had 32 games with 30-plus points in a row. But he's no longer on OKC, which brings me to my next point. The free agency market can hurt the Oklahoma City Thunder because prior to any trade deadline within the next 5 seasons, any one of the players from the starting lineup can be traded away to a different team. Here are some of my examples. James Harden, to start off, was drafted by OKC, but he now leads scoring on the Houston Rockets. Kevin Durant also played for OKC and lost to the Golden State Warriors in the NBA Finals, and he opted to join the Warriors the following season. Another example is, according to Timothy Rapp from BleacherReport.com, Paul George showed some serious interest in joining the Los Angeles Lakers before signing with OKC. When his contract expires after the next 4 seasons, he may opt to join LeBron James in LA, with the possibility of never winning a championship in OKC. On the other hand, free agents from other teams may not choose to come to OKC, and regardless if they do, every team will have its own superstars, and OKC will have to face them in the playoffs or in the final games. This brings me to my next point. Like any other team, OKC may trade veteran players in order to get draft picks, and this can hurt them. The NBA is a business, and therein lies a hard business decision which can and will be made within the next 5 years for draft picks. There is a risk in relying on picking the next Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan of this generation, or selecting an untested player who will become a future bust with the first draft pick that OKC has. My advocate's next claim was the head coaching staff, and he placed much emphasis on the head coach, Billy Donovan. He boasts a 502 to 206 win-loss record, but that is only for college basketball. He's still relatively new and unproven in the NBA, and he faces stiff competition from other coaches such as Greg Popovich from the Spurs, who has 20 years of coaching experience. And just this season alone, there are other coaches who have better records than Billy Donovan, such as Steve Kerr from the Golden State Warriors, Nick Nurse from the Toronto Raptors, and Mike Budenholzer from the Milwaukee Bucks, and that's just to name a few. Also, Billy Donovan's contract is only good to the end of next season, so he will have his contract will have to be renegotiated if OKC wants to keep him afterwards. Lastly, I will speak about the team's defense. My opponent claimed that the Thunder has the best point differential in the Western Conference. On the contrary, according to ESPN, the Warriors and the Nuggets have the top point differentials in the West, while OKC comes in at third in the West and seventh in the league. In conclusion, I refuted the claim that the Oklahoma City Thunder will win the NBA championship within the next 5 years on the basis of other players in the NBA are much better than their top 2 players. The free agency can hurt them, as well as future draft picks. The head coach is not that great, and they do not have the best defense in the league. History has a way of repeating itself, and in the past, OKC has never won a championship. When they were located in Seattle as the Supersonics, it took them 22 chances in the playoffs to win 1 championship 40 years ago.
All right, the claim was clearly stated. The secondary issues are listed. There seem like there are a lot of supporting points in the argument. You do break down and respond to each of those arguments in very direct ways. There's not a lot of discussion except reminding us of what the advocate's argument was. You don't really talk much about their evidence, but you do talk about their examples. You used the 2 players that they presented on that first point and talked about how they aren't all that great in comparison to other players in the league. And I thought that that's a pretty reasonable approach, and the suggestion that the 2 players, could they in fact make a difference, that was a little bit problematic. I also like the fact that you suggested on the later point that on free agency that could threaten this very thing that you're talking about. You got specific information about one of the players, which I thought worked well, and especially with the deadline coming before the 5-year limit that's going on, unless they do it within the next 4 years. That's a possibility. Okay, so I appreciated that. You also had good examples of Oklahoma City making I don't know if they were bad trades, but they got rid of players that were more significant and important, including 2 that you mentioned. I thought that was a pretty effective response to the argument about free agency and trading and how that could benefit or hurt a team. It seems like the loss of those 2 players would be pretty substantial impact on the team, and I don't know if there was a change in the team's record after they lost those players. That might have been one other layer that you could have put into the argument that maybe would have made it even more convincing. The idea that it is a business and that there's an economic repercussion for all the decisions that are being made, I think that we don't really get into the discussion about what the economics are. It gets more and more expensive if you're a basketball organization to acquire players, keep players. There's a lot of money that's involved there, and I don't know how sustainable the league is when it comes to, can they still pay what's necessary in order to be successful to as many players as they are going to need, and whether or not Oklahoma City can sustain that. Maybe a little bit more information on that would be helpful there too, but I thought that you had the right argument there. It's just sometimes they have to make those choices. The comparative data on the coaching staff, Gesundheit was fine. It puts the argument into perspective. I don't know that there's a demonstrated impact of the coach on the team currently. I think you could point out that under the current situation, the team was not successful at getting the playoffs. I don't know how long the guy's been the coach at Oklahoma City and how many years he gets an opportunity to prove himself in this situation. But if he's been there a couple of years and they still haven't either moved far in the playoffs or won the championship, what's the reason to believe that it's going to change? And then you have good arguments that suggest that there are other coaches, again, same kind of comparative data that talks about those things. And I thought that you did a good job kind of putting those in perspective, both with the coaching records, the years of play, and then earlier when you were talking about the players and the ranking of the players when it came to scoring and lack of being in the top 10 in any of the other categories except for, I guess it was steals. Oh, and then on the defensive argument, you had some nice data. You had a good piece of evidence that talked about how the team didn't rank particularly well in comparison to other teams. Despite the advocates' evidence that said that they did, you had them third in the Western Conference and seventh in comparison. That means that there are other teams that are going to be better defensively than them in their own conference, and that there are better teams than them. There are 6 teams better than them. That's almost 25% of the league is better than them if you include both conferences. You know, again, perspective I think is pretty clear there. All right, thank you.